Good morning. My name is Barbie Bloodstein, and today is Thursday, October 14th, 2004. And I'm interviewing Jane Gellman. Jane, what is your full name?
Jane Elizabeth Mann Gellman.
You didn't change it ever in your life?
That's it.
Okay.
I got married.
When were you, right? When were you born?
October 22nd, 1948.
And where?
Milwaukee, Columbia Hospital.
Who were the first members of your family to settle here that you are aware of?
In Wisconsin, the first to settle here was a man named Baruch Schlesinger-Wheel. He came from France and came to the United States in 1845. And he came, the family myth is that he came from France with on a mission from the French government to buy horses. And he kept the money and he stayed here.
Oh.
We don't know if that's true or not, but we do know that I learned relatively recently that one of the only jobs that was available to Jews that lived in Alsace-Lorraine, which is where he was from, that was at that time in France, was horse trading. So it's possible. Who knows?
How did he make a living here, or how did your family?
He was a land speculator. He was in the state legislature. He founded the town of Slinger, which used to be called Schlesingerville. Schlesingerville changed its name to Slinger during World War I because it sounded too German. His birth name was Schlesinger, and he took on the name of his wife, Eliza Wheel. We think because of he probably left a family. There's another possibility, he left a family in Europe. We don't know about that, but there is a possibility that that's true.
Where were your mom and dad born? Were they born here?
Both my parents were born here.
And did they grow up in Milwaukee, or?
They grew up in Milwaukee. Their parents were very good friends.
Oh, really?
So they knew each other their whole lives.
What was it like for you growing up here? I mean, your generation, you and Chip and.
Right, and I have a twin sister, Judy.
Right.
That's a big question. I grew up in a very big extended family. My grandmother, my father's mother died when I was 3. But the rest all lived, into my childhood. Baruch, the old guy, owned land in Washington County near Slinger, and that land has been in the family to this day. And there's a house that's there that was built in 1898 by my grandmother's aunt. Her name was Ernestine Wheel Stein, and they called her Teeny. Teeny built this house. She was widowed when she was 24 years old. She had no way of making a living, and there had been a hotel on Cedar Lake that had burned down. My grandmother's father had run that hotel. And it was one of the only places where Jews could come. And most of the lakes in the western part of west of Milwaukee, no Jews were allowed. But on Cedar Lake, at this hotel, it was called the Cedar Lake Hotel, Jews could come, but it burned down. And so there were people who came to Teeny and told her that if she would build a house, they would come as guests. And so she built this house. It was finished in 1898. And so she ran it until she died, and she willed the house to her female relatives.
Oh.
And my grandmother was the only one who wanted it. That was in the 1930s that my grandmother and my grandfather took over running the house as a guest house. It was called the White House.
It was called the what?
The White House.
Okay.
And she had to borrow money from her first cousin. It was during the Depression. She had no money, they had no money. But she had one first cousin whose husband had made a big pot of money. And so she borrowed money from her first cousin, her best friend. Her name was Celeste Simon. And then ran the house paying off the debt. And actually I found this summer we found the papers documenting this debt.
Really?
So yeah.
Well, because I know it's
and
still
the title. Well,
such
the
an
title.
important.
The title
Sure.
to the land, because the title went in and out of the family because Baruch was always I think he was a really shady character.
Oh.
We also recently found a letter. My mother just found it. I just saw it this past week. because we were doing some renovation at the house at Cedar Lake. So we found all this stuff. And this letter was written to Teeny from a guy named Charlie Schwartz, who also used to come out to Cedar Lake, and he's related somehow. I can't exactly remember how. But something had happened with BS, as we call him, that no one, that he didn't like and that wasn't ethical. And somehow Teeny found out about it from Charlie's wife, and Charlie didn't want people to know. But it was a letter saying how horrible it is when somebody that's older than you behaves in such a way that's not, and I don't know what he did,
Oh, yeah.
but behaves in a way that doesn't live up to what you expect as a way that people should live. So we don't know what it was all about, but it was written in the 1880s, I think, and a beautiful hand written to her.
That's just
and it was there at Cedar
very
Lake, and we'd never
interesting.
seen it. Yeah.
Jane,
So-
you grew up in a Jewish way, in a Jewish home. Were you in
My
a Jewish neighborhood?
family grew up. I grew up in Whitefish Bay.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had gone to Whitefish Bay High School. My father had gone to Shorewood High School. Everybody had been. My family is different than most American Jewish families because they've been in America for a long time. Of my grandparents were all born here. 5 of my great-grandparents were born here. So my grandmother on my mother's side, who lived until I was, my kids remember her, she lived into her 90s. Her family came to the United States in the 1830s and settled in the South. So they were all classical Reform Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents were some of the earliest members of Congregation Sinai. I was in the charter first grade class. My dad was the chairman of the building committee.
Right. And her
My
brother is
brother
now
is
the chairman
currently
of the new
chairing
building
the
committee. Right.
committee, is the co-chair of the new planning for the renovation of Sinai. So I was raised in a classical Reform family, more temple-based Judaism, not as much at home. Certainly it was important, but my parents were very interested in us being part of the whole big wide world that's out there. And we were raised as Americans who were Jews.
I don't remember what your dad did.
My dad was an engineer.
Okay.
And he worked for a company called Laddish Company.
Oh, sure.
in Cutting.
Okay. Similar, we have very parallel lives. I'm I'm older, but similar.
Mm-hmm.
Were you aware of anti-Semitism?
No,
I wasn't either.
not at all. I have one anti-Semitic incident that I remember in my childhood, which was at the folk fair one time, and I was down there with a bunch of my friends, and I don't even remember what happened, but there was something that happened around us being Jews, and I don't even know why. So I remember that it happened, but I have no recollection of anti-Semitism at all.
This is for you a strange question, but your involvement in the Jewish community, I mean, you've been every place, and leadership. JCC, was that an important role for you, or you tell me?
Okay. My parents were always volunteers, and so I was raised in a family where you volunteer, where you give away money. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but when we were very staunchly, like right in the middle class there. But giving away money, giving of your time was all part of how we were raised for both my parents. My mother especially involved in Girl Scouting. She was the president of the Girl Scouts here. She was on the national board of the Girl Scouts, and those were very important parts of her life. And Girl Scouting was important to mine, too. When I got married, I married a Jew, Larry. We met in Oberlin, Ohio, and I don't know that I was looking for somebody that was Jewish necessarily, but I certainly remember it made things easier. That he was raised in a middle-class family in St. Louis. I was raised in a middle-class family in Milwaukee, and it just made life a lot easier. We would go to services like for the holidays, and we certainly identified as Jews, but we weren't really actively involved in the Jewish community in any way. And then ended up adopting our daughter through Jewish Family Services in Cincinnati, and that was our first real connection to the organized Jewish community, and that was obviously a very powerful and important connection. We moved back to Milwaukee when Sarah was 1, and and got involved in the temple, but sort of like my parents were. We'd have seders and we'd,
Sure.
once in
Sure.
a while go, but not especially involved. And then we went to Israel, and quite honestly, that was a major changing point in our lives. We went, I think, in 1980. I don't remember, 83 maybe, something like that. And by this time, Sarah was going to the Elm Creative Arts School, City of Milwaukee school, and our son Sam was like 2. And Israel had a really powerful effect on both Larry and me. We went on a Federation Acharai mission, and we are the poster children for why the Federation takes people to Israel. It started getting us involved. By the way, I would say ahead of time, before I said this, that Larry already was being asked to do things in the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. He was a television news reporter, and he was being asked to do a lot of things. I was not. That's another topic,
Sure.
But I would suggest that probably in many families, men get invited into the community before women, especially at that time, and that time was no different. So he was, I think he might have by then been asked to have been on the temple board, and he was already getting involved in the Federation, which I wasn't. But we went to Israel. While we were there, we were sitting in Haifa having dinner with a group of naval officers from the Israeli Navy, and we were talking about schools and where our kids go to school, and we were explaining Elm Creative Arts School and why it was important to us that she was at this school. And this guy looked at us, I don't remember his name, he said, "That's quite an American kind of thing to do." And we said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, how do you make them be Jewish?" And we didn't know the answer to that. Fast forward, in the
Sure.
meantime, Milwaukee Jewish Day School had been started. And our closest friends, Michael and Roberta Gellman, were sending their daughter Johanna in the first class, where there were 11 students. Larry actually got on the board the second year, and that's when we went to Israel. And when we came home, we decided that we could easily raise Sarah to be an American, but we couldn't raise her to be a Jew. Mm-hmm. That we needed help to do that, and that it's not something that we could do by ourselves. And so we enrolled Sarah in the Milwaukee Jewish Day School. I started taking a Bible class at the JCC with the Terry Cohen, which was very important to me, and that sort of started us on the path. The logical place for me to connect was the JCC. Sure. I loved sports, and I was, physically active, a gym teacher, and so I ended up on the board relatively soon after that at the JCC. I actually went on the board right before the JCC almost was bankrupt and was saved by the Federation to stop. It was right at the time that the campus was being built. I foolishly thought that I could be involved in the building of the campus, but that was, at that time, the JCC was very weak, and the donors really didn't trust the JCC because we had failed to earn their trust. And so the control of the project was in the hands of the Federation, and I was a new young little board member, and I didn't have much to say about the building of that building, but have been involved at the JCC ever since.
Well, and you've done so many other things, and you and I became president of COA right after you, and I think your parents, having been in both communities, Jane, do you have any regrets of choices that you've made? Not necessarily life choices, but volunteer opportunities, or is there something? The other thing is there something about you that we don't know that you think is interesting?
About me, that's interesting.
Well, there's a lot interesting about you, but
I think that a lot of the things that I've done, especially around Israel, start not because of a connection to Israel, but because I was a foreign exchange student when I was in high school and spent a summer in Finland with AFS. And so that what intrigued me about Israel was the connection, obviously, as a Jew, but what really intrigued me as well was with that connection, was trying to dig inside and understand and Israel and all of its complexities. As you know, at AFS you're sort of taught to enter the world as if you were an anthropologist and just study it for a while, try to figure out what's going on, because there's a lot of stuff you don't understand when you're in another culture. So I have been intrigued by Israel, by its problems and by its history and by all that's wonderful, but also with a real strong conviction that you can't you can't be blind to Israel in terms of the problems.
Right.
And so, you know, I go there a lot. I'm very involved in Partnership 2000. As the first chair here in Milwaukee, I am now I'm just about to start serving the 4th year of my 2-year term as the chair of the cluster of the communities in Tulsa and St. Paul are also involved with us in this project. I'm leaving actually a week from today. Today I'm actually leaving to go on a big bike ride that I'm doing, and then on Sunday, a week from Sunday, I'm going to Israel, which is the 2nd time I've been there this year. So that's typical. I'll go 2 or 3 times a year
Well,
for
that's,
doing that.
yeah.
And that's
Good time.
because I have a phone call
Right.
to Israel that I
Well,
have to take right now.
Okay, well, Jane, thank you very much.
never
Wonderful,
did this
and,
before.
and if any follow-up, we will, but I think this was very complete, and
Okay.
you've given a lot to this community. Great, thank
Great.
you.
Thanks.